Hello, friends, and welcome to the Cinemondo podcast with Kathy, Mark, and we have a special guest today.
Ben Steiner.
Yes, we're very excited. Our special guest, all the way calling in from the UK. His latest film is currently streaming worldwide on Disney Plus and on Hulu. It's called Matriarch. And a special Cinemondo welcome to Ben Steiner. Ben, thanks for taking some time to chat with us today.
Yeah, absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me on.
Well,
Sure.
I watched Matriarch a few weeks ago because I love watching genre films. We're all horror fans here, and so I say, what's the Mark's pick? And it's like, oh, the first one came up was Matriarch, and I said, I want to check this out, and you immediately caught me in the first 5 minutes of the film. And we all know you can watch the first 5 or 10 minutes of a movie and go, okay, this. Either I'm into it or maybe I'm not going to stick with it. You usually try to watch every movie all the way through, but sometimes you sense, this is just not catching it. But this film, Matriarch, really caught me at the very outset. And it's the way it's directed, the way the colors, you really get into this character. Her character's name is Laura, played by Jemima Rooper. And she's excellent in it. And you really catch what you go, what's up with her life? It seems like she has a wonderful life. She has a job, this interesting office. Her boss is very friendly, but she's not a happy person.
To say the least.
And right there, I was caught into the movie, and I watched it, and it was very impressive. I said, I would love to get this guy on to talk about the movie. So here you are.
Thank you.
I also appreciated that you had a woman who was in advertising, like her kind of aggro. Yeah, because I'm in advertising. I do movie posters. You were talking about you did your movie posters, so I'm in advertising my whole life. So I get that, especially being a woman in that industry, you've got to really, really fight. So that automatically, when I saw that, I'm like, okay, this is a badass woman because she's in this business. And you can tell. Yeah. So I was immediately drawn in by that. So it was very relatable for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've in parallel to kind of making short films in the kind of run up to making Matriarch, was an advertising copywriter for many years. So that's kind of my world as well.
Oh yeah. And you do some of your own movie posters.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's an interesting step from advertising to making films because there's a lot of similar elements in storytelling and putting ideas across effectively in ways that go right to your mind. Like Mark was saying, it grabbed him in the first few minutes. That's such an important piece of advice. It sounds a little crass to say you got to grab the audience right at the top. You got to shoot the cannon right at the beginning of the song. But the idea is pretty effective. I mean, it's sound. You really need to put it, especially these days where there's so many different entertainment choices out there.
Well, I think that's if I could jump in, I think that's the difference to how things used to be or whatever is that you're every minute of the way you're fighting against the possibility of the viewer just going, actually, I'll just you could be 47 minutes in and they're like, oh, actually, I think I'm gonna watch one of these other 20 million things that I could be watching. I was recently very inappropriately, because she's not old enough at all, but watching The Thing with my daughter, the John Carpenter The Thing, which is one of my favorite movies.
So
ours too.
And mad to think it bombed at the time. But anyhow, but in that first 20 minutes, which by kind of, I guess, hour, I think, it looks like we're all kind of roughly the same age. By kind of our standards, it's like, it's pacey, it begins like straight away. There's like, why are they chasing this dog? What's going on? There's the helicopter. Now he's like, someone gets shot dead in like the first 10 minutes, and then obviously by, I think, exactly the 20th minute, we've seen the first eruption of the thing out of the dog in the cage or whatever. But I was, kind of watching my daughter, and she was like wavering, like, are we going to keep on? And by the time, by minute 20, when the tentacles, but the dog's face splits into four and the tentacles and stuff, she was in and then fully in for the whole rest of it. But you would think that the first 20 minutes of the thing is like, you're right in there. But by modern standards, it's like that's slow. You know,
the world of TikTok, my 15-year-old daughter is the same way. If things aren't happening in 2 or 3 minutes, she starts getting antsy, which is just it's a different world.
Well, I wanted to talk about what inspired you to do the Matriarch, because I'm always interested in what's the genesis of the idea and how did you come about developing this?
Yes, so Hulu. I mean, so it was commissioned by Hulu, so it wasn't. There was a pitch process and what have you, but it was fully funded. Fully funded by Hulu, and I think kind of ultimately always destined for Hulu.
Right.
Barring it just being catastrophically bad. And so what it kind of came out of was Hulu did this thing, Huluween, which they've been doing for I think a few years now. And I made a short film called Earn for the first Huluween, and they off the back of that, I was asked. It was actually through 20th Digital Studio, who were the executive producers on both Earn and Matriarch, to think about how I might expand Earn into a feature. And that's how it came about. But Earn and Matriarch have almost nothing in common story-wise, apart from there being a very toxic mother-daughter relationship that's at the heart of it. And I went through a few versions of that relationship and how that might play out in a feature, and took them in directions that had nothing to do with the Matriarch that I ended up making. But it ended up being that.
Well, I loved that, because the idea of the toxic mother-daughter relationship is so ripe for horror, because it can go so wrong in so many ways. Yeah. So I loved that, how you brought that really organically into our folk horror kind of environment where, and it also hinges on people don't want to get older. And that's so intrinsic to the female experience and the male experience, but especially women. So the idea that she goes back and her mother still looks pretty young, it's like, what? So you're instantly like, oh, what's going on here? So I loved how you brought that into it. That was very, very sly. So how did you base any of this on any real relationships? You don't have to name them. Any real relationships?
No. I mean, I can't.
Out of your head.
No, no, really. I mean, not that I'm aware of. And I think one of the big pleasures of writing is I mean, I don't know if any of you guys are writers yourselves, but either you guys and anyone else listening to this, who is a writer, knows that it's for most people, myself included, it's really painful, it's really hard. Which is one of the reasons why it really annoys me, the way that the kind of feature or films generally are attributed to the director, whereas it's like, but I mean, there is without the writer, there's no film. And I think writing. I mean, I think writing and directing are kind of painful in different ways. But I mean, with writing, obviously, you're beginning, unless you're adapting something, you're beginning from nothing. Anyhow, that's
right.
That's conversation. And I've actually completely forgotten what your question was. Sorry, could you go again?
No, I guess the basic question. Basically, did you base it on any real experiences or people?
I mean, I've been in advertising for there's years of advertising experience to draw on, and Laura's I don't know how kind of spoilerific or not you kind of want us to be.
Let's not do too many spoilers, but we can obviously.
I'd say. Well, I'll say this, and then I think I'll say this, and then that will be my gauge for how spoilerific I can be or not. But Laura has quite an ingenious way of keeping going throughout the working day,
right?
And that is a true story, not something that I have done, but that was told to me by someone that I was freelancing with in an agency. And I don't know how we got onto it. They said, "Oh yeah, my friend used to do this thing." I was like, "That's really clever." It kind of went there. So that's a true. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm extremely fortunate. My kind of upbringing and my kind of family background is really nice. It's been really joyful and positive and supportive and great. And I think that's maybe because that was actually one of the first things that the first time I saw my mum after she'd seen Matriarch was her first question was like, "Yeah, so do you want to talk about?" And
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, and the answer that I gave her, that I'll give you now, which is the completely honest truth, is that I think, as someone who has had a really lovely childhood and continues to have a really great relationship with both of my parents, having a really deeply toxic, awful one, and obviously Matriarch kind of takes that to the next level, is like the ultimate nightmare. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of it is drawing to finally answer your question. It is drawing on my own experience, but kind of in the kind of mirror image, or the other way around.
Right, sort of the inverse version of the.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well,
Did you
interesting. One of the.
Good. I was like, sorry, I'm just so fascinated by this movie. I was I have to ask another dumb question. Real quick. So is the Matriarch based on any true folk folk mysticism or anything? You just made up your own universe?
No. So I think no, not that I'm aware of. Apart from again, it's really hard to do this without being really.
You can spoil a little bit. Well, we'll let people know.
So there's a character who.
Should I put a spoiler alert up really quick? Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
Spoilers. Very assaultive.
Let's just stay up, I think.
Yeah, just cover your face.
Or just flash repeatedly all through the whole show.
Okay. Nevertheless, I'll try to be. So there's a very significant character who appears very late on in the film, but is at the kind of heart of what's going on in the village, and that character is inspired by. It's kind of 50-50 by a character that I came up with decades ago. I used to do a lot of drawing. I still kind of keep it up a bit, but not as much anymore. Called The Worm Eater, and actually the film was originally called Worm Eater, and then it was decided to be called Matriarch. And the Worm Eater was a kind of demonic father creature who had kind of the mouthful of worms.
That was so.
Yeah, and because that character is just just floating around kind of in the back of my head, and then as I was trying to turn or develop Ern into a feature film, and Worm Eater just kind of butted in, and just by virtue of it being having these two women at the core of the story. Worm Eater just kind of turned into a mother goddess, basically, just flipped from being a father to a mother, and then that turned, and then I kind of belatedly realised that what I'd actually done was create a story with the classic maiden, mother, crone, kind of triple goddess archetype. So actually, again, sorry, an answer very long-winded, but in answer to your question,
you're here to be long-winded. We want you.
It's interesting stuff. That's what we want to hear. Those three kind of archetypes, the mother, maiden, crone, is kind of in there, and that is an absolutely kind of classic folkloric archetype. But it wasn't something that was conscious. It just kind of I sort of did it, and then I was like, that's what I've done.
That's amazing.
But while I was, kind of looking this up and researching things for what became Matriarch, I came across Tlazteotl, who is an Aztec goddess. She's the goddess of filthy things, and so she kind of represents a lot of kind of very interesting convergence of things. She represents lasciviousness and the cycle of rot and rebirth. And there's a museum in Washington, I think, that has an icon of her, an Aztec icon of her, and she's kind of gritting her teeth and squatting, and then has like a mirror image of her own face popping out of her vagina. Birthing herself, and she is actually the inspiration for the golden icon at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, interesting.
So it kind of
fertility goddess.
So it draws on kind of folkloric archetypes and that kind of thing, but none of it was conscious, but it is kind of obviously there nevertheless.
Yeah,
it seems like a lot of those mythological archetypes are sort of built into our genetic memory anyway. We relate to them automatically. It seems.
Well, it's kind of the other way. I mean, absolutely right, but it's kind of the other way around, isn't it? Because we civilization after civilization expresses the same things because they're expressing something innate about us as
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Ben, in the story, Laura leaves. She quits her job and goes out to the countryside to stay with her mom, who's played by Kate Dickey, and she's just tremendous in this.
So good.
I mean, another incredible performance.
Yeah.
And their relationship, as you said, is really what it sort of takes on the rest of the film, and where it goes from into sort of that folkloric, folk horror, if you want to call it that. But I think her performance is amazing, and it's sweet and scary at the same time, and it's
sweet.
And it's really
tell me.
She's sort of like, oh, please come stay with me. Come hang with me, and but you realize, she's not that much older than her daughter. At least, like you're going with, there's not a big age difference, so something is up. And of course, the village, the way you film the village, going back to what I said earlier, here's the English countryside, but there is this sort of heaviness to the way it's filmed, or the way it's shot, or the way it's colorized. It really has that feeling of like there's something foreboding happening in this small, quaint village in England. Yeah. So that really worked to add to that whole sense of being in a different place and something is off here.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to, the DOP on Matriarch was Alan McLaughlin, and the colorist was Michelle Court, and I think they, also worked really closely with both of them, and both did a great job. And it was really important to me to not have a kind of a chocolate boxy version of the English countryside, because I kind of think, in a way, it made. I think what's, hopefully interesting about Matriarch, or certainly interesting to some people, the audience that it has found, is that in some it's really grim and dark and grueling, but it's also kind of knowingly quite silly, and I mean it's an out and out comedy at times, and quite sort of preposterous. And there is a sort of, if you're going, when someone's going to the countryside, and it's like, oh, here are all the villagers, and I mean, not all the villagers are super friendly, but there is a kind of, an obvious facade going on. So it's not like we all know what's going to happen. Do you know what I mean? There's no one. I don't think anyone is surprised when kind of the can of worms, no pun intended, is kind of open, and
the can of worms.
Things are kind of not as they first appear. But having said that, I still I think because it's kind of once you get into the village, it's obviously going to be like everything's not how it not as rosy as it appears, and actually dark things are going on. I kind of wanted it to be quite grim and grey immediately, rather than trying to be like, oh look, it's there's like hanging baskets everywhere and it's really beautiful. Like, oh my god, actually there's some dark stuff going on. So I wanted it to be, as you said, quite kind of dark and foreboding in its look, sort of from the off. And then obviously just kind of water and stagnation and all of that stuff, all of those kind of shots of the irrigation ditches and all that stuff. As you're transitioning into the countryside, it is obviously thematically is ties in to all that stuff. The feminine and water and all that.
Yeah, that's true.
And what's happening in that car with those two people? That's fairly early on when that happens. You're like, what's going on here?
Okay.
They're having some good clean fun.
That's what you do in the village. What else is there?
What else are you gonna do? Yeah.
So nothing going on. Yeah. What I thought was kind of funny, and this isn't too much of a. I hope spoilers. Anyway, the idea when you kind of start seeing what's happening and you see sort of the fallout. There's all the black. And you kind of go, would I do this in order to stay young? Maybe. You almost kind of go, would I? I don't know. It's kind of gross, but maybe.
I think you will. I mean,
it's kind of. I mean, you could see the temptation for these people to want to stay vital and young, and it's like, well, all I have to do is this. And
not that bad. I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, if you want it,
so bad, it's reciprocal.
Yeah.
It's not so terrible, but you have to like struggle. I love movies that posit this theory of this terrible things happening, and like you would kind of like, I might be on board for that, maybe.
Yeah.
The complex sort of emotions you have to go through for that. That was really fun.
You know, think about things like Pet Cemetery.
Yeah.
Would you do that? Yeah.
Like the choice.
Oh, so creepy.
Yeah, those are the horror movie elements. We were talking about the archetypes before, like the parents that aren't good parents, and the spouse who isn't a good spouse. You know, the person that you most trust in the world is not who you think they are.
That's right.
Or what you think they are.
Ugh.
Those are the things I think that make the sort of have the depth in horror films. What are some films that inspired you in your
so
film,
I mean,
filmmaking?
like the sort of towering, inescapable, the Wicker Man just sort of looms very large over, over this film.
So good, yeah.
And there were kind of some ways in which kind of early on I sort of tried to kind of like lessen that. I mean, like intrinsically, you know, there's someone, again, like spoiler alert, there's someone from the city, or being kind of lured,
right,
you know, to the countryside, and everything is not as it seems, and then
bit of a fish out of water story.
Anyone watching this can kind of work out where that's going. But yeah, I made some kind of efforts at the beginning of the kind of, I suppose it would be like some kind of script development process, to try and slightly alleviate that. So I had, and I'm not saying this is, maybe it wouldn't have, worked out in the end. So at one point I thought about having just kind of flipping it around, basically. So rather than going from the city to the country, maybe do it the other way around. So maybe have Laura has fled, live in the countryside, and so would obviously be doing a different job, wouldn't be in advertising, and that her mum calls her back to the city, and it's a kind of residential, kind of like a tower block full of these kind of old people, but who don't look old, so a bit more like Rosemary's Baby kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe then with so I don't know if you want to hit the spoiler. Do you want to hit the spoiler button?
Go ahead.
Hit the spoiler button.
So the character that we were talking about a little bit early on, this very significant character, being kind of entrapped in like a disused swimming pool in like the basement of this tower block, rather than in the greenhouse. But yeah, I think that definitely the feeling was from kind of those with their the power to green light or not, was that I think that kind of sort of traditional, I suppose, some of those signifiers of like classic, I think is the word, of like classic sort of British folk horror. I think it seemed to me were kind of things that made the project as a whole kind of attractive. And again, because the film, while being really dark and grim and harrowing at times, kind of also isn't taking itself that seriously a lot of the time either. I kind of I think, I mean, it seems to work because it's some people like it, at least.
People like it. Well, I mean, because I think part of that's your advertising background. Maybe I'm just positing is that you're aware that it doesn't just have to be one thing, that you can appeal on different levels, and that might be bringing some humor into it, bringing some unexpected levity where you don't expect it. That to me, kind of, not only is it kind of in a way a break and helps you set up the next thing to be even more powerful, it also gives the audience a second to breathe, which I think is important too, because then you just get kind of numb if it's just one grueling thing after another, right?
Yeah,
and that's why I think the movie was so watchable, even though when you think about it, it has so many, like you said, grim things, is that it wasn't so dark that you're like, oh my God, this is a workout.
Yeah, it's not exhausting. But also, I suppose you, it means the audience doesn't necessarily know where it's going to go, because although, like we've said, there are in many ways I think let's think the classic. It's quite classic in in its kind of structure, and if you kind of see the Wicker Man, you kind of know where it's going broadly. But because of these tonal shifts, you're not on sure footing in that sense, and that you're not like, is the next beat going to be a joke, or is it going to be something
true,
really upsetting,
The Wicker Man is so strange in the way it presents. It's not a typical horror film in the way the pacing or the way it presents the the things. It's like I mean, especially for the time when it came out, it was a lot of stuff happens in broad daylight, and there's these great songs. It's got really cool music, and the people all seem really happy, like they're living this great happy lifestyle. And then there's little little twists in there that like I was talking about before, where your attention is taken from where you think you're supposed to be looking. It's putting your attention to something else, and that's I think that's another one of those one of those little elements of horror where something is happening over here that you're not noticing yet, or something.
Yeah. I mean, that is, I mean, I'm not in you know, so hopefully it doesn't need to be said, but just to be clear, I'm not in any way putting my film in the same, even vaguely the same, you know, kind of league as the Wicker Man. But I think what it has got in common, apart from a lot of just basic plot stuff, is that it's not, you know, it's not your typical horror film at all. Mine, I think it's more. I mean, Kate Dickie was saying in an interview. I think she was completely right. She kind of said, actually, really, it's kind of like, it's sort of like a dark. It's kind of like a dark drama, really, about these two women in this toxic relationship that kind of lurches into horror territory, sort of with increasing frequency. You know, as you kind of progress through it, until finally it just kind of tips into it completely, and just kind of stays there. But I kind of think, yeah, anyone. Well, I don't want to. That's very kind of strident statement, but I think, you know, I can imagine that someone going into it kind of hoping for and kind of, you know, expecting a kind of a straightforward horror film would like not have a great time with it, because it's, you know, it's not, you know. And there's a lot of, just go back to your question earlier about kind of influences, like there's like sort of like Ken Russell, like The Devils and kind of stuff like that. So like The Devils, it's like again, obviously not putting it anywhere near that in terms of how great The Devils is, but it's an out and out comedy to the verge of slapstick. I mean, there's that bit where two guys, Oliver Reed and a plague doctor, are having a sort of fight with stuffed crocodiles, I think, or like medicinal crocodiles. I mean, you know, so it's knowingly just completely stupid at times, and then also like incredibly transgressive and harrowing and horrific.
Yeah. Right. It is one of the most harrowing
so that kind
films.
Of thing. It's just like, what's amazing, just
so hard.
Yeah, that it's just being able to kind of sort of like lurch around and kind of, you know, grab onto quite a few different sort of tones. And that's probably the worst mixed metaphor I've ever said in my life.
Lurching around.
How do you grab onto mixed tones? That doesn't, anyway, but you know what I mean. Just
well, Ken Russell was really into that thing where Ken Russell was really into that idea that you were talking about, where things are being, I mean, go to the Lair of the White Worm, and it's a folk horror film, but it's almost, like you said, a slapstick comedy in some ways. It's like almost fully into comical realms, you know? Which makes it even creepier in some ways, you know?
Yeah. That's true.
Ben, I want to go back to that character you're mentioning at the end of your film. Just the effect of that was so
eerie,
interesting. I've never seen an effect like that. Usually, you know, when you see CGI, it's everywhere and stuff, but this had a different vibe to it. And I was just wondering how that effect was done, because it was so different from what I've seen before in other movies.
Yeah, I mean, it was mainly, so Chris Clements is the guy who did he did like all the VFX work on it, all nearly almost all of it. So yeah, so originally the character itself is a woman from here in Bristol in the UK called Anna Frost, and she was kind of put in prosthetic makeup and shot in a miniature version of the kind of the greenhouse environment that I don't know if I want to hit the spoiler button again. I think we're just beyond that now, aren't we? So she's in in kind of prosthetics and in a miniature version. I think the scale was roughly kind of 3:1, because we kind of thought, well, let's just say Anna herself is quite short. I think she's like 5'1" or something like that, 5'1". Let's just say she's 5 foot. So let's say the goddess, spoiler, is is 15 foot. So yeah, so we just kind of did a 3-to-1 thing there. And so the plan originally was to shoot real worm elements and kind of composite them on, and the same with her hair, and it just didn't kind of quite work out, and kind of wasn't looking right. So we brought Chris in, and so all of that stuff, both sets of worms are to my understanding, it became kind of convoluted. But my understanding is that it's either entirely CGI or almost entirely CGI. But yeah, so what's great is that we have, we get, I think, a really nice wordless performance of
yes.
I mean, I've said it now, so yeah, of the goddess. So that's, I think it's quite obviously that's clearly like a real kind of human performance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And then in terms of the look and everything, that's kind of augmented with
right. It really works.
Yeah. What I liked about that effect too is she wasn't overtly scary. Like she was almost maternal. Like
that was the thing. Again, that was
these gentle looks, but the worms. But the rest of it was very elegant and slow and dreamlike. So she wasn't like terrifying and but you could see why people could almost be drawn into it. So I really loved that aspect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you see her twice, and the first time. I wanted her to be monstrous, so that's we tried to kind of darken her face, and so you're kind of getting more of an impression of her. And obviously, what she's doing is monstrous. And then the second time we see her, it's much more complicated because then Laura is there. I mean, again, we're just fully into spoiler territory, but yeah, so Laura's in the pool and everything, and there's you have this moment of connection and all that. But yeah, I remember when I was. It was lovely actually, and I think in your intro clip, I think is the Chinese theatre, is that in there?
I think I got that in there.
Yeah. So that was I had an amazing experience. But the world premiere of Matriarch was at the Chinese Theatre at Screenfest, and it was their opening. I think it was like the opening film. Which was nice. Amazing, and. That was the first time that I'd seen either watched the film with an audience at all, and seen it and seen those effects on a big screen. So I was I'm very, very, very nervous, and they responded to it really well and laughed and gasped in all the right places.
Oh, good.
That's great. Yeah, that's
very very gratifying.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, it was.
What's next for you, Ben? Is there another feature in the works? Or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope so. So I have Matriarch some leapfrogged some stuff that I had been working on previously, and now obviously my hope is that the Matriarch will kind of open the doors for those things. So I made a short film in 2014 called The Stomach, which is a kind of body horror, crime thriller, ghost story, and the feature version of that I'm hoping could be the next thing. And then I have this is a very reductive way of putting it, but basically a haunted house movie called Dead Windows, which is, again, the script is kind of very far along, so it could be that. And then I have something which is actually the thing that's closest to my heart, but it's both my least commercial and most expensive. The script, so not a great combination. So I mean, I don't know about that, but it's a kind of exploration of a real life hoax, like vampire hoax that took place around Highgate in North London.
I love that idea.
I grew up in the early 70s, and it's kind of about the characters involved in that.
And then it turns out to be real.
Sorry.
And then it turns out to be real. They think it's a hoax. But it's not.
No, unlikely. Given the people involved. But so I've got some, I've got a few, kind of irons in the fire, and I'm developing other stuff. So yeah.
You did a short in an anthology series, correct?
Yes, I did. Yeah, so that was a short film. That was called The Flea.
The Flea. Okay.
The film that I made, the short film I made, I think, was the one before The Stomach. And actually, recently I started thinking about how that could maybe be expanded into a feature.
Yeah. Have you thought about doing a series? That seems very popular nowadays.
Yes, I mean generally I've just thought about getting employed really.
Yeah.
Just trying to get to the next job.
Yeah.
Well, I think this
like
film I was going to say this film opens up a lot of doors for you because obviously a lot of people are watching it, and it's sort of like now features are, you can take some of your shorts and turn them into features if the funding is there, and I would think the funding would come from somewhere, so you can make these.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, I know. Mark made a short film, so he knows all about the tedium and the horror of the.
Well, funding is everything, and it's just so it's like I write these scripts, and then you hit this brick wall that you just you're there with the spoon, and it's just not working. You can't cut through the brick wall with that. So, that's what it is. But I mean, congratulations on this film. I think you burst through the brick wall with this one.
I think so.
And hopefully there'll be better, other things for you coming down the pike.
That's right.
So
I think Burk had a question. You were going to ask something, Burk?
I think we may have gone past that. I was just gonna.
We can go back around.
Short films. Okay, let me rewind. The form, like the short form of film. I've always really liked short films, as far as how they can tell a story really quickly. But it's very different from a feature film length, or like a short story is very different from a novel. Obviously not just because it's longer, but there's ways that you have to burn in like really quick what the story is about. You have to get really quickly into it. You have to define your characters very quickly, and you have to tell your story, and you can't linger, And do you prefer short films or longer films?
Yeah. So, and sorry, and when you were saying just now, like, you have to kind of get straight in there and all of that, were you talking about short films just then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I'm not sure that I agree, because I think that there's actually a lot more, a lot more freedom in a short film. So I'm very kind of narratively minded, and so like all of my shorts really so far are kind of wall-to-wall dialogue, and it's all kind of
interesting.
Kind of moving forward, and they are really very kind of compressed, either very compressed feature films or kind of fragments of feature films, and not there's the. I've made them all as calling cards, for a feature, because I haven't. This summer was never. That wasn't my intention with the summer quarterly or any of the other short films that I've made. But then there are other, lots of people making like really brilliant shorts. Like my friend Fred Hanna has a film called From Beyond, From Dot Beyond, out at the moment, which is amazing. And it's completely different to the kind of stuff that I make. It's very much there's an idea there, which is basically about what if it's kind of aliens arrive on Earth, basically. But then it's like it's about 10 minutes long, but it's a mood. It's all about mood, and it's all
right.
Incredible. It's really atmospheric. But there is, it does kind of take that idea of what if aliens arrived on Earth and go somewhere with it. But it's not like there aren't any characters. I mean, there are people in it, but there's not like it's not taking one character kind of through the story. So and that short is brilliant and doing really well. So I think it's there is far more freedom, and I think if you want to in shorts, and I think in the feature world, if you want it to be that loose and kind of vibey in the feature, you're deep into the art house world, and good luck to you.
Yeah, that's true. You start off with big crazy, and then you kind of lure people into that kind of low key cool stuff, and then just blow them away at the end. Then the formula.
Well, Ben, hopefully when your next film is done and out streaming, that we can have you on again and talk about that. And because this was really fun. And Matriarch, people, if you haven't seen it, please check it out on Disney Plus or Hulu. It's really worth your 90 minutes. It's a complete film and really well made. And thank you so much for coming on with us, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been really fun.
It was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, we have. I feel like we have more that we could get into and talk about, which we will next time you're on.
Ooh, the teaser.
Yeah.
You have to agree on camera that you'll join us again.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will do that.
Contract. The last parting question is usually a question that Burk asks about what were the films from your youth that you think inspired you to become a filmmaker?
I mean, yeah. So I think, like I said, like there's kind of The Wicker Man is the big one. But do you mean, are you asking kind of what films does inspire me generally to kind of?
Yeah, just what really made the impression. What is the question, Burk? You have the right.
Usually, like when you're a kid, you kind of come to a point in your life where you're like, I want to make movies. I want to be involved in that. You see something on television and it triggers something.
Yeah, so I did. I mean, I think how I was saying at the beginning about showing my daughter 12 the thing, which I promised her that she could watch it, and then because I thought it was a 15 because there's no sex and drugs in it. And then,
no women.
And then I looked at the box. It was actually on DVD. I was like, oh shit!
Yeah.
It was too late, and I promised her we were going to watch it. So we watched it, and that I think was maybe unconsciously carrying on a tradition of my mum or my parents just allowing me to watch incredibly inappropriate movies, and I've always been macabre and I've always been into horror since even before I'd even probably even seen a movie. I mean, I've always loved kind of spooky stuff and gore and all and just all all of that stuff. But I kind of came to filmmaking quite sort of relatively late in my kind of mid 20s, having been really into drawing and illustration, and hit a brick wall with that in terms of my talent really, and what was in my head and my ability to put it on paper. There was I'd reached an impasse, and I just thought maybe I could maybe I could do film instead, and
love it.
Just that happened. So yeah,
that's awesome. That was a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Interesting that they're coming from illustration where you have to tell a story with a drawing.
You just had to do more with your imagination. Right? That's really cool.
Great.
So, thank you so much. This was so fun. I love talking to filmmakers, especially movies I really like. It's always so inspiring. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Everybody.
Stay on for a sec. Chat out.
Yeah, hang on. Hang on. We'll talk some more.
Just for